What's up, guys? This is Jensen and welcome to another video. So I'm going to take a look at the borderline case for Phillip Rivers in terms of the Hall of Fame. And I mean, this is just such a tough case right now when we're looking at Phillip Rivers and figuring out whether he should be in the Hall of Fame or not at this point in his career. Because when we look at just the stats, he is definitely a Hall of Fame quarterback. I mean, he's 6th all-time in passing yards per game, and he could easily pass Marino if he plays all 16 games. He's only about 2,000 yards behind. He's 6th all-time in passing touchdowns per game, and he's only about 23 touchdowns away from Dan Marino. So if he has a good season, he'll probably be able to pass Dan Marino for most touchdowns per game. So he could get into the top 5 of both those categories if he has a strong season this season. And when we're looking at his touchdown-interception ratio, it's about 2-to-1, which is pretty good in my opinion. He's top 10 all-time in career passer rating. When you're just looking at the pure stats, he's clearly a Hall of Famer. When you're just looking at his play, you know that year in and year out, Phillip Rivers is always one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And when you're just looking at the stats, he's easily the best quarterback in his draft class. Because even though Eli Manning and Ben Roethlisberger are sensational, Phillip Rivers in terms of stats are on another level. So when you're looking at it from that angle, Rivers should be a surefire lock for the Hall of Fame. But the problem is when you're looking at everything else that goes into being in the Hall of Fame, he just doesn't have it in my opinion. And that's what makes it borderline at this point. This dude has 5 career playoff wins. And I mean, that's just not enough at this point. He's 5-6 in the playoffs. He's choked sometimes in the playoffs. And the bottom line is that Patrick Mahomes in 2 seasons has 4 playoff wins. I mean, that's the point of time we're in at this point. Matt Hasselbeck has 5 playoff wins, and he's not even in the Phillip Rivers stratosphere. 5 playoff wins is not enough, and it would be one thing if he had 5 playoff wins and 1 Super Bowl. Then he'd be a Hall of Famer. But he doesn't have any Super Bowl appearances either. And obviously the 2 blown opportunities for a Super Bowl perhaps are 2007, where they were obviously snake-bitten that season. Phillip Rivers having to play through a torn ACL, and LaDainian Tomlinson going out in the first quarter of that game against the Patriots. And they only lost by 9 points. You have to wonder if Tomlinson was healthy the entire game, would they have been able to win the game? Because they had to settle for 4 field goals. If even maybe one of those field goals gets turned into a touchdown, the game becomes a lot more interesting. If 2 of those field goals get turned into touchdowns, they probably maybe even win the game. So when we're looking at it that way, I mean, that one's got to sting. Because when we're looking at the NFC, what happened there, the New York Giants make it to the Super Bowl, and it took some Eli Manning magic for them to beat the greatest team, arguably, of all time. If they had won that game, the New England Patriots, they went undefeated. I had to think, though, if the Phillip Rivers-led San Diego Chargers went into that game against the Eli Manning New York Giants, I might have to pick the Chargers to win that game. They could have won that Super Bowl. But I think, to me personally, 2018 might be the bigger deal. That's the one where you look at it and you say that they could have won the Super Bowl. Because Phillip Rivers, he was a potential MVP candidate. The Chargers were 12-4. They beat a very tricky Lamar Jackson Ravens team where Lamar Jackson, even though he couldn't really throw that well, you knew that they could potentially be a dangerous team in the playoffs. And then there was a lot of people picking them against the Patriots. The Patriots roster, when you looked at it, it didn't look stacked or anything. They didn't look amazing. And if they had been able to win that game, where Rivers kind of choked in that game, the Chargers as a whole kind of choked and the Patriots ran away. I mean, Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, they completely dissected that team. That was a really bad game for the Chargers. But if they had been able to win that game, I mean, look at the rest of the path. You had the Chiefs who had a Swiss cheese defense. That defense wasn't like last year where it was actually pretty good. 2 years ago, that defense was the worst in the league, arguably. And then when you're looking at the Super Bowl, you're looking at a Rams team that only put up 3 points. They probably would have won the Super Bowl if they got past the Patriots. And that's got to sting, again, if you're the Chargers. And, I mean, when you're just looking at it from that perspective, he doesn't have any Super Bowls. He only has 5 career playoff wins. And he didn't really transcend the game. Like Aaron Rodgers, even though he only has 1 Super Bowl, I think it's pretty agreed upon universally that he is a lock for the Hall of Fame. That's because he hit the highest peaks, arguably, in NFL history for a quarterback to hit. Maybe other than Patrick Mahomes, we've never seen a guy hit this high of a peak in terms of Aaron Rodgers in his prime. So when we're looking at Rodgers, even though he only has 1 Super Bowl, even though his stats might not be as good as Phillip Rivers, I think pretty much everyone agrees he's going to be a Hall of Famer. Phillip Rivers, I mean, he does have that weird sidearm throw and all, but he didn't transcend the game. He wasn't an electric talent like that. So if he doesn't have a Super Bowl either, that's what makes it borderline. That's what makes it tricky. But I would have to say, if his career were to end today, if he were to abruptly retire or something like that, I would have to say he's a Hall of Famer slightly, just because if you're about to be like almost top 5 in passing yards per game, passing touchdowns, when you have those type of stats and you have the longevity, you've been a good quarterback for many years, arguably actually a great quarterback. Let me correct that, great quarterback for many years. I think that you definitely get the Hall of Fame nod for me, even though it's a tough one. It's borderline for sure, but when you have to take all aspects into account, I would have to say he's a Hall of Famer. But things get interesting this season, because even though I think Rivers completely lost it last year, I think he's completely on the decline. We have to remember that Rivers 2 years ago was an MVP candidate. If Rivers can be somewhat of that MVP candidate, Phillip Rivers, this season, with a strong offensive line, Marlon Mack at running back, T.Y. Hilton, they'll probably add another guy at wide receiver. That defense is ready to go. They're championship ready. I keep talking about them. Darius Leonard, DeForest Buckner, Malik Hooker, these dudes are ready to win a championship. If Phillip Rivers can be even a starting caliber quarterback, the Colts will be in the playoffs, and they're going to be a tough out for anyone. I mean, maybe other than the Kansas City Chiefs, there isn't a team that you would say definitively beats the Indianapolis Colts if Rivers is playing well. Like, the Ravens, you would probably pick them, but Lamar Jackson, we don't know how he'd perform in the playoffs after seeing what he did the first 2 trips. I mean, even though Deshaun Watson's a stud, we know the Texans roster, it's kind of been ruined by Bill O'Brien, to put it in a nice way. And when we're looking at the rest of the teams, there isn't really anyone else you would say is definitively better than the Indianapolis Colts other than the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC. If Phillip Rivers can lead this team to the Super Bowl this year, which I completely doubt, I think he's completely on the decline at this point, but if he leads them to the Super Bowl, I think that makes him a lock for the Hall of Fame, even if he doesn't win it. Just getting to the game at this point probably helps Phillip Rivers. That probably puts him over the top. But even without a Super Bowl at this point, I have to say that he is a borderline in for the Hall of Fame right now. That's all I have to say, though. Thanks for watching this video, guys. Please like and subscribe. I'll be providing you with more NFL and NBA hot takes as the season goes on. Have a good day. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Jensen Sports. See y'all later.